How does a normal person become a Buddha, an enlightened one, a fully awakened, wise, and compassionate being, someone who has realized the true meaning of life? This is the central question of Buddhism. In his first teaching after the Enlightenment, the Buddha presented the world with his basic answer, the foundation of his 45 years of teaching. He gave his insight in the framework of what he called the Four Noble Truths. That is, four things which are facts for a noble, or as he defined it, awakened person. The noble truth of suffering was first. The noble truth of the origin of suffering came next. Third and most important, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. And fourth, the noble truth of the path that leads to the cessation from suffering. In July of 1996, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet gave 2 days of teachings on the Four Noble Truths at the Barbican Hall in London. It was a historic occasion. The Dalai Lama was invited by 26 different groups who are part of the network of Buddhist organizations in the UK. They span practically the entire spectrum of Buddhist traditions in the world. And while the historical significance of the teachings on the Four Noble Truths had a lot to do with it being the first time he had given them in such complete detail in the West, even more significant was the fact that it was the first time in modern Buddhist history that a major teaching was requested and attended by ordained clergy from just about every Buddhist denomination. The Barbican event was an ecumenical first. That it happened at all was undoubtedly due to the great respect with which the Dalai Lama is held, not just in the Buddhist world, but in the world at large. Up to 1949, when Tibet was invaded by Mao's Red Army, it was an isolated, forbidden land on the roof of the world, where foreigners were allowed only under special circumstances. In the Western imagination, and through most of the East as well, the Dalai Lamas were mythic figures shrouded in a far-off world of magic and mystery. When he was forced to flee Tibet in 1959, the 14th Dalai Lama brought much of that magical world with him into the 20th century. Since the mid-70s, he has traveled widely, speaking out on the tragedy of what is happening in Tibet, and teaching the tens of thousands of Westerners who are attracted to Buddhism. People sense that this simple monk, with the warm smile and enthusiastic laugh, really seems to live everything he talks about. Given the amount of time he spends devoted to his people, his mastery of the philosophies of all the Tibetan schools is astonishing. Even among Tibetan High Lamas, he is held in a respect that borders upon awe. So when he came to London to teach the Four Noble Truths, there was great anticipation of a truly memorable teaching. The Four Noble Truths are the foundations of Buddhism, the common ground of all the diverse Buddhist traditions in the world. We're told in the Dhammapada, a collection of the Buddha's most ancient sayings, that in the days following his enlightenment, the Buddha sat in perfect peace under the Bodhi tree. When he looked out at the passing world and saw the suffering of the masses of humanity, he wondered how the truth that he had realized, so subtle and profound, could be understood by others. He debated whether to remain in silence. Finally, moved by compassion for those with, as the sutra describes it, only a little dust in their eyes, he resolved to seek out the ascetics who had been his companions until just before his enlightenment. He found them in the deer park at Sarnath. There he first turned the wheel of Dharma with the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. By the end of the teaching, all five had realized enlightenment. The Four Noble Truths are often misunderstood as delivering a pessimistic message that suffering is inevitable. The precise opposite is the case. The major announcement of the truths is that suffering can be overcome. Buddha's unprecedented discovery was that freedom is possible. As he put it, the door to nirvana is open. The fact of nirvana is the third noble truth. Thus, the first noble truth is only the diagnosis of the problems of the unenlightened. The unenlightened do not know that their normal state is suffering compared to nirvana, why that is so, and that there is a complete cure and how it works. The Four Truths help us to understand these things one by one. As the Dalai Lama says, one must recognize the illness of suffering before one can attempt to cure. Recognizing the cause, one realizes that there is a cure, and then one can aspire to gain freedom from suffering. At the Barbican, the Dalai Lama taught the Four Noble Truths from the viewpoint of early monastic Buddhism first, then from the Mahayana or Universalist perspective, and finally from the point of view of Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism. According to His Holiness, all these schools teach ways to understand the true nature of reality. Of these, most agree that the Middle Path Consequence School, you'll hear it referred to by its Sanskrit name of Madhyamaka Prasangika, is the most advanced and scientifically precise. It was developed from the teachings of the 2nd century Indian Buddhist sage Nagarjuna by his most influential follower, the 7th century sage Chandrakirti. Madhyamaka Prasangika philosophers observe and explore physical and mental things and conclude that nothing exists absolutely, independently in isolation, but all things exist only relatively, depending on their causes and conditions. For example, this table here seems to possess an intrinsic tableness, an identity belonging to a class of objects of a certain form that perform a certain function. But obviously it didn't just materialize as a table from that seemingly intrinsic tableness. Before it was a table, it was lumber. And before it was lumber, it was a tree. Its tableness is a result of causes that other causes can remove. What does sit here is more or less a temporary configuration of wood that we can designate a table. In fact, I am presently using it as a chair. And if we were all termites, we might designate it as dinner. Similarly, everything in this universe of ours exists because of an interdependent network of causes and conditions. Everything is empty of intrinsic reality of its own. Everything, even this body that we tend to cherish so fondly, isn't it also a result of causes and conditions? Where is the self that we seem to think inhabits the flesh? What's left when this is reduced to a pile of ashes, or when it becomes food for worms? If there is no inherently existing self or soul, what is there? Obviously something. We function in this world. This table is not mere nothing. But if all things, events, and persons are without any intrinsic reality of their own, if everything is emptiness, then what is this world of phenomena, and what are we, the consciousness, we think, that perceives it? Here some schools, like the idealists, called Chittamatran, fall into an absolutist pitfall by saying that there is nothing but the mind, ultimately emptiness, and denying any reality at all to self and things. In this way, they're similar to the idealist or pantheist schools in Western philosophy. Other schools fall into the nihilistic trap by asserting that the only reality is the relative one, that emptiness is just meaninglessness, completely negative. The Madhyamaka Prasangika school avoids both of these extremes. Unlike the absolutists, it does not deny the relative, designated reality of persons and things. And unlike the nihilists, it does not deny the reality of the absolute. Rather, it comes to the conclusion that the relative can only exist because of the absolute, and the absolute can only exist because of the relative. Or, expressed more poetically, the all is the one, and the one is the all. By correctly deepening our understanding of this emptiness of intrinsic reality of all things, we eventually come to the direct realization of emptiness, which transforms us and gives us the ability to relate to things freely and to beings compassionately. This is our highest possible happiness, nirvana, or enlightenment, the freedom from suffering that is the bottom line of the Buddha's teachings on the Four Noble Truths. According to the magnificent Play Sutra, when he was enlightened, the Buddha first said, profound, peaceful, unfabricated, translucent, uncreated. This reality I have found is like the elixir of immortality. If I teach others, they may not understand. Better I stay alone, silent in this lovely forest. Fortunately, after a while, he went out to teach anyway. And just as fortunately for us, His Holiness continues this effort in our day. So Here is part 1 of the 14th Dalai Lama's teaching on the Four Noble Truths.
Brothers and sisters, I am extremely happy to be here with you and to have the opportunity to explain about Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths, as you know, the basic Buddhist teaching, the foundation. That's extremely important. In fact, without knowing or without the Four Noble Truths, the knowledge or understanding, and without experience which drawn from that teaching, then it is impossible to practice Buddha Dharma. So therefore, I am extremely happy. At the same time, you know, my belief that various different major world religions also have the great potential to serve humanity. That means to produce good human being, nice human being. Good and nice does not mean a nice face or good face. Nice and good means nice heart, good heart, more compassionate heart. So all the religions, all the major religions, they have that kind of potential. That's quite clear. So therefore, usually, as I always telling the people, it is better to follow one's own traditional religions. And then those people who really feel your existing religion is something not very effective, and I think even more some truly radical atheist. Then somehow Buddhist way of explanation sometimes may have some attraction. Then to such people, I think you see, all right. At least, I think generally speaking, it is better to have some kind of religious training rather than a radical or extreme atheist. So, those individuals who feel really, truly, some Buddhist way of approach, Buddhist as a training of mind, is some attraction, then in that case also, it's very important to think more carefully. And once you really felt that Buddhist approach is something really suitable to oneself, then it is individual right to adopt Buddhism as a personal religion. So this I want to say at the beginning, because when actually you say explanation about this Four Noble Truths, then of course you say I have to say the Buddhist way is best. I have to say. And also, if you ask me what is best religion for you, for me, then my answer, without hesitation, Buddhism is best. But that does not mean Buddhism is best for everyone. Certainly not. Clear. And also, because I think I would like to further emphasize, when I say the other religion have this great potential, this not simply is a polite, right? Out of the politeness or diplomatic way. No. I truly see, firstly, whether we like it or not, the entire humanity cannot be Buddhist. Clear, fact. And similarly, entire humanity cannot be a Christian or cannot be Muslim. Even Buddha's time, even India, Buddha's own country, entire Indian, did not turn into Buddhist. But genuine, you see, warm heart, loving kindness, some kind of very forceful living kindness in their mind. That I noticed. So then, you see, my conclusion is, these various different religions have the potential to produce this good heart. Irrespective of what philosophy, whether you see the philosophy of creator or some other things, that doesn't matter. For non-Buddhist, say about the idea of nirvana or next life, these seems to them nonsense. So similarly to Buddhist or creator, these things also sometimes looks nonsense. But doesn't matter, live it with these things. But in actual result, there's a very negative person through various different religious traditions and transformed a nice person. That is purpose. That's the result. So sufficient reason is to respect. Now I speak through my own language better. 당에 남주한다 낭치 모저를 지르잖아요. 다와도 저번이려 두그레스. 근데 다와 가르스로는 된중 다와래. 아니 저바 가르스로는 처음에 저바레스는 미디셔디.
Whenever I have been given the opportunity to introduce Buddhism, I always make it a point to explain Buddhism in terms of two principles. One is development of a philosophical viewpoint based on the understanding of or appreciation of interdependent nature of reality. And then the second principle is the principle of non-violence, which is the actual action of a Buddhist practitioner and deriving from that view of interdependent nature of reality. So the meaning of non-harming or non-violent behavior or action or conduct is that if possible, one should help others, and if not, at least one should refrain from harming others. That is the essence of the principle of non-violence, non-violent action. So, from a technical sort of to explain these principles in the technical Buddhist language, then you can appreciate that in terms of what in Buddhism is called as taking refuge in the three jewels, Triratna, and what is known as the generation of the altruistic mind or enhancement of one's good heart. As it is very evident that the idea of or the practice of generation of the mind entails committing oneself in activities that are aimed primarily at helping others. And whereas the practice of taking refuge in the three jewels lays the foundation for the individual practitioner to live a way of life within an ethically disciplined lifestyle, which avoids engaging in actions that are harmful to others, thus by living according to the laws of karma or laws of causality.
So today in the semji nyamne yaojonglia
So therefore, unless the individual practitioner has a good foundational experience or practice of taking refuge in the three jewels, it is not possible to have a high level of realization of bodhicitta or generation of the altruistic mind. Therefore, from the Buddhist point of view, the demarcation or the line that distinguishes between a practicing Buddhist and a practicing Buddhist and someone who is not a Buddhist is made on the basis of whether or not the individual has taken refuge in the three jewels.
Buddha Dharma Sangha, Ongone Rane, the Gebjiresha, Sampajik, Sem Nalolia, Jeshikujungutuna, and Machavre. Yasam Nala, Kandina, some Tunguna, Nawama Pidu.
So, when we talk about taking refuge in the three jewels, we should not have the notion that it involves a ceremony where you take the refuge from a master or something like that, and simply by participating in such a ceremony, you become a Buddhist. That's not the point. The point is, if even without a master, if you, as a result of your own reflection, become fully convinced in the validity of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as the true ultimate object of refuge, and then entrust your spiritual well-being in these objects of refuge. And that's the point when you become a Buddhist. You have taken refuge in the three jewels. Whereas if, even though you might have participated in a ceremony, but if there is any doubt in your apprehensions, in your mind about the validity of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as being ultimate objects of refuge, that very suspicion or doubt sort of rules you out from being a practicing Buddhist. Therefore, for a practicing Buddhist, it is important to understand who these objects of refuge are, or what these objects of refuge are: the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
Buddha said, "Mijik chidawa chikanglia, but Shakyamuni Buddha, the Jalia good thumb, any Zabaze, any Yangalan, that the Kansa Chik Chanlia, quite memory. Buddhist lived to talk away your nation money, that she.
So when we speak about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and when we speak particularly about Buddha, we should not confine our understanding of the term Buddha only to the historical person who came to India, who taught a certain spiritual way of life and so on. Rather, our understanding of the concept of Buddhahood should be based on levels of consciousness or levels of spiritual realization. So it is a spiritual state of being that has to be understood. So therefore, we can, in Buddhist scriptures, we can speak about past Buddhas, Buddhas of the past, Buddhas of the present, and Buddhas of the future. So the question now is to try to develop an understanding. How does a Buddha come into being? How does a fully enlightened being come into being?
The Buddha says, "Young the Mayon, see the Messiah, Chokunjo, Tandara, Tore, Chokunjo says, Yana, Kindukunjo Yungiari, Kindukunjo says, Yana, the Pangja Munju of Panaji Yunguyana, Pangja Henji Sabins of Panaji Yunguri, Diomayina, and a Dajamba Yunguri, Sanja Yunguri." So there is one in the that's our Chokunjo to you. Chokunjo is the condition that is shaped.
So when we think about Buddhahood, certainly we will be reflecting upon the question of whether it is possible for an individual to attain such a state or not, or to become a fully enlightened being, to become a Buddha. So here we find that the key really lies in understanding the nature of Dharma. Because if Dharma exists, then certainly Sangha will exist. Sangha members who will have engaged in the path of the Dharma and have realized and actualized Dharma. And if the Sangha members exist, Sangha with the realization of Dharma exist, who have reached stages of levels of spiritual states where they have overcome at least gross levels of negativities and afflictive emotions. If that is possible, then we can envision the possibility of attaining total freedom from these negativities and afflictive emotional states. And that state is the Buddha. So we find here that the key really lies in understanding the nature of Dharma. So when we talk about the Dharma jewel, then here, of course, we are talking about the two dimensions or the two aspects of the Dharma. One is the path that leads to cessation, and one is the cessation itself, cessation of suffering and afflictive emotions. So when we are talking about Dharma here, I think one has to be able to make a distinction between the usage of Dharma as a kind of a generic term, which covers also the scriptural Dharma as well. And this is the generic term is the sublime Dharma, which refers to the Buddha's teaching as well. Whereas when sort of the Buddha's teaching and the realizations that are based on the practice of the scriptural Dharma. But whereas when we are talking about Dharma within the context of the three jewels, we are talking about the Dharma jewel here. Here, Dharma should be understood in terms of cessation, true cessation, or the paths that lead to that cessation. Because it is only on the basis of understanding the true cessation and the path leading to that cessation, then we can have some concept of arhatship or state of liberation.
Today in this ane, has the tending doibi, tending the nalolia, any su tending the Jung Tong de Che Tong, Su Che Tong de Sangi Dishinship Tong.
Therefore, in one of the sutras, the sutra known as the Pratita Samuppada Sutra, Buddha stated that whoever perceives the interdependent nature of reality, the dependent origination, the principle of dependent origination, sees the Dharma. And whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha, or the Tathagata.
The Su Tension Devon Tong Te Sung Tiag, Tension Devon Talaya, any Nada de She, the Sheshuali, the She, the Shivakalia, Pajita, Zo and the Umed Luruki, now Luruya said that Sheve, Tawa Dishashin Shuna has a quadeshuali.
So when we try to understand. So when we try to understand this statement of the Buddha, the scripture, whereby he states that whoever perceives the interdependent nature of reality perceives the Dharma, and whoever perceives the Dharma perceives the Buddha. If we were to approach this scripture from the perspective of the Nagarjuna's teachings of Madhyamaka school, then one could say that we can arrive at perhaps the most comprehensive understanding of the implications of that statement. So when it comes to talking about the philosophical viewpoints of Nagarjuna, even if people were to criticize me that I'm perhaps biased towards it, I would certainly accept that criticism.
Today, this is tension double joan sidatelia da petit sadigi damp sache sumupan sadi joan da tension double joan da di tension double joan sidadigi nyala tumu ko de kareslamna juda ken la tene juda ken sam la tene joan da dujing tendency.
So when we try to understand this fundamental Buddhist philosophical principle of pratitha samuppada, dependent origination, the understanding of this principle that is common to all Buddhist schools is in terms of causal dependence. Pratit means to depend on, and samuppada refers to origination. And the understanding that is common to all the Buddhist schools of thought is to look at this principle in terms of the causal dependence, to appreciate and to understand that all things and events come into being only as a result of interaction of causes and various causes and conditions.
That digi implication karas labaina kasol bge ji duishin chebe chut yidi tamjalo du mebal chung maris any chebab loyo ngondo sana tan cheba maris du da gen zam da dene any chung sa de shiyore.
The significance of making this statement that all conditioned things come into being purely as a result of causes and conditions is to deny two possibilities. One is the possibility that they can come into being from nowhere with no causes and conditions, causelessly. So that is one possibility that is being negated. And the second possibility that is being negated is that perhaps these things can come into being as a result of a transcendent sort of designer or a creator.
다데네 텐중 탄다 니버직디 숙쟁기 체지베이나 아니 차지체 가서 차지 차진시다진다 아니 숙매베지베이나니 직시바도 리지베이나니 계신거지 아니 차지체되니 근데 전에 도든 아니 셔가다 가이나야 아니 차지체베스 근데 인도산에 차쟁의 최대 차르되는 다샤시 that magic shape.
However, there is another dimension to this, to the understanding of this principle. That is to say, to understand principle of dependent origination in terms of parts and whole, the concept of parts and whole, how all physical objects, material objects, can be understood in terms of how parts compose a whole, and how the very idea of, very concept of wholeness depends upon the existence of parts. So there is that dependence in the physical world. And similarly, in the case of non-physical entities like consciousness, then you can look at these entities in terms of their temporal sequences, how unity, the very idea of unity and wholeness is dependent upon successive sequences that compose a continuum or a wholeness. So when you look at the reality or universe in these terms, then not only can you understand all conditioned things as dependently originated, but also the entire phenomena could be understood in terms of this principle of dependent origination.
다전에 숨버식이야 아니 척하다 카이네 다도잖아 낭점 테마스 다도잖아 니야야 말이스 아니 하면 매버스로나 매버 말이스 오나 가르스로나 아니 척을 기하고다 유진 땡지 척을 완게 얘는 두대버시레스 유진 땡지 다 척을 땡네 and that's something is as you said.
And then there is a further dimension to the meaning of this principle of dependent origination, which is to say that all things and events, in fact everything, comes into being as a result of mere aggregation of the many factors. And whereas when you analyze
other factors,
there is an understanding that it is simply in dependence upon others that they came into being, that they lack any independent or intrinsic identity or intrinsic existence. There is no autonomous existence or identity to anything. And the identity and existence that we perceive of things are in some sense contingent, which comes into being as a result of an interaction between our perception and the existence of the reality itself. However, this is not to say that things do not exist, but they do exist. But what is the case is that they do not exist with independent, autonomous realities.
That dangerous idea, near Quaj, sorry, according to this chain. That tether dangerous term, Tona, Churtungri said, Church the British Barcelona. That Churdy Mangu Shaman or something, Mangujuman or something. Dujin Samla Tanera, Dujin Samla Tane, Chue, Dangerous Tona. Any Didu, that got a Didu penny using any penny using a deer, Dujin Tane, you have Shani, any Dunge, that got a Didu. Didu Yongayagi, that Tapsi Chiatalia, Didu, Dungamayaya, that Dawayagi, Tapsi Chiati, any Dujin Den in Rokoyagi, Dindegi, that legend take church to of a legend take church, tell them to Ashtoa.
So, corresponding to these three different sort of dimensions or three different levels of meaning of the principle of dependent origination, one can also read three different meanings into this concept of dharma, because referring back to the statement again, to say that seeing dependent origination leads to the seeing of the dharma. So here, if we were to relate to the first level of meaning of dependent origination, which is in terms of causal dependence, by developing a deep understanding of interdependent nature of reality in terms of causal dependence, then one will be able to appreciate the workings of the karma, the karmic law, how experiences of pain and suffering comes into being as a result of negative actions and negative thoughts and behavior. Similarly, how sort of desirable experiences such as happiness and joy come into being as a result of causes and conditions that are that corresponds to that, such as positive actions and positive emotions and thoughts. So, by understanding the principle of dependent origination in causal terms, one will be able to develop a deep understanding of the law of karma.
다가는 신기 다 유진 싸움을 때네 중에 땡중기 내루 즉 통일을 전에 왔다 가서 우리 신앙 뭐부 다시 지단한 뭐부 탐자로 아다 유진 싸움기 교월 때네 아니 교월 나서 용기에 되봐 다디지 코살레티디 쉐이로 왔다 로 코살레티디 다지 아니 가서 우리 교된 제비 땡지기 남샤 데이터네 제다 민주베 동네들아 대외 디기디에 다 준제기 침 대원에는 라딩이지 세브차.
So once you develop a deep understanding of the principle of dependent origination in terms of causal dependence, what it does is it gives you a fundamental insight into the nature of reality, that everything that we perceive and that we experience come into being as a result of interaction, aggregation of causes and conditions. and you develop a fundamental perspective towards your own inner experiences and also towards the world at large, to see everything in terms of this causal principle. And once you have developed that kind of philosophical outlook, then you will be also able to locate or situate your understanding of karma within that principle, because the operation of the karmic sort of laws or karma is in some sense an instance of this overall general causal principle.
That's the name. Then the Tinjung, that's Chashel, then the Tagwam. Kadada, Miguan Tagway, that Tinjung Kwa Dile Yundu, any Tinjung Kwa Ditone Jayona, Dambar Naya, Dambar Modrube, Nane Mitubiti, in shame.
Similarly, when you have developed a deep understanding of the two other levels of understanding of dependent origination, these are understanding in terms of sort of dependence on parts and whole, and also dependence of the sort of interdependence between perception and existence, then one will be able to develop a deeper philosophical sort of perspective on the world, which is to appreciate that there is a disparity between the way things appear to you and the way things really exist. That what appears to you as some kind of intrinsic, autonomous, objective reality out there does not really fit the actual nature of reality.
Emotion nalolia. Any Kasolbege Eugene Nane Mitumba in particular, any emotion digging Zindande, and a Nane Tumbalian Zin. The Negatoneta, Gian Chayong Chigi, Takadachi, Numo Nang, Numo Tao Tao, in Shineji, Chinchlo, Loy, Shepiachi, Yonsari.
So once we are able to develop this perspective, this understanding that there is a disparity, a fundamental gap or a disparity between the way things appear to us and the way things really exist. Once you appreciate that gap between appearance and reality, then you will gain a sort of a certain insight into the workings of your own emotion and your reactive sort of emotion towards events and objects. You will gain an insight that underlying our strong emotional responses or reactions to situations or events, we see that there is an assumption of some kind of independently existing kind of abiding object, some kind of objective reality out there.
So the negative any loy kasurge lochrago gashegi any pigeta shenyu medeba shenyu medeba shetia jikche chajine ada tene takwa imbe kho di thane any ngoni ji tube tone any tungnilia ji ngebaru ji daos ni yo yina dini gi sungji gi thane ba sujogi ta loi namjang any kasolta loi namjang ta jamen de na lo ne ino ji kada chinjilo ga da lo shenyu sa shenyu so re chinjilo lo do de ni shenyu me denge dinde gi lo yi ji ge denge ji shetu ya ji che.
So once you are able to develop this understanding and appreciation of this fundamental sort of disparity between appearance and reality, and then, as I mentioned before, you will be able to understand that underlying many of our strong emotions, emotional responses towards events and situations, there is an assumption of some kind of existence of an independently existing reality out there. And this will give you an insight into sort of various functions of the mind and the different types of sort of levels of consciousness that exist within you. And also to understand that certain types of cognitive events or mental states or emotional states, although they may seem so real and the objects appear to them so vivid, but in reality they are mere illusions. And
자, 아니 저 직내 때에 딱봐 임버 디 코에 때에 딱봐 임버 준세도 제디 정신이 땅에 코아지 내용야지 윤두 땅반이 있어야 돼 김정여 되네 땅반이 임버디 김정여 되네.
So you to carry on with the translation of an earlier statement. So if you are able to develop this understanding that within your own mental states and emotional states, there are certain states which may seem very real and which may seem to be relating to objects which seem so real and vivid to you, but in reality these are states of illusions, that what the objects that they relate to do not really exist. So through that way we will be able to gain an insight into what in technical Buddhist language is called the origin of suffering. These afflictive emotional experiences or emotional states that lead to confusion, misapprehension, and then which afflicts the mind. And when this is combined with the understanding of this interdependent nature of reality at the most subtlest level, then we will also gain insight into what in technical Buddhist language is called the empty nature of reality, the emptiness of all things and events, how each and every object and events lack an intrinsic or independent reality, that they come into being only purely as a result of aggregation of many factors, that they do not possess existence or identity that is independent or autonomous. So once you gain insight into that emptiness, then of course you will be also able to understand that any apprehensions that conceive reality in the contrary way, that things exist intrinsically, that things exist independently, then you will know that these apprehensions are misapprehensions. These are misconceptions pertaining to the nature of reality. And then you will also realize that they have no valid grounding either in reality nor in your own valid experiences. Whereas the empty nature of reality has a valid grounding both in reason and also in your own experience. Through that way, you will be able to understand, appreciate the possibility of arriving at a state of knowledge where you can conceive the possibility of eliminating that misapprehension completely, and that is the state of cessation. So the point is that by developing a deep profound understanding of the principle of dependent origination, you can understand both the truth about the origin of suffering and also subtle suffering, subtle origins of the suffering, and also the truth of cessation. So this is the meaning of the statement that by understanding or by seeing dependent origination, you see the Dharma. So through this way, you can see the truth of the cessation and the path that leads to that cessation. So once through this understanding,
최디통 디톤에 아니 가동야 차차심이 그돌이야 아니 가서 주디 던지 참여 때문에 아니 과람 그 최디통 될 때네 아니 상계통 돼야지.
So once you understand the truth about the path and also the cessation that the paths lead to, then of course then you will be able to conceive the possibility of Sangha members who would have realized and actualized these states, and also Buddhas who would have perfected in these states and these experiences. So this is to sum up, this is the meaning of the Buddha's statement, that by understanding the principles of dependent origination in causal terms, in terms of causal dependence, you understand the law of the karma, the causal principles that operates fundamentally in reality, and also by complementing that understanding of causal principle with understanding of dependent origination at a much subtler level, then you understand the nature of dharma, in terms of cessation and the paths that lead to the cessation. And once you have gained understanding of cessation and the path, then you also gain an understanding of what Tathagata means or what the Buddha means.
자, 드네 인도산에 denshi namsha shebala, denyi namsha, denshi namsha chamu shebala, denyi namsha shebala shedo.
So therefore, I feel that in order to develop a profound understanding or comprehensive understanding of the Four Noble Truths, I think it is necessary to have understanding of the two truths.
나하자고 시세단 거리야. 아니 동바태는 den중태그레스. den중태는 교대 경기 디두 교대 경을 때네 디두 용야디 태그레스. 디다나 동네다 바타버레스. 군주다 바타버레스. 아니 도군유나 다되게 드셔디디 공부장니 아니 군주다 바지 유나 아니 디사야지 부데스 디사야다 연구를 서로 딱 간다지 도군기 남샤 데이터네 아니 고람디에 아니 태그레스 고람 타나 긴두구조 태그레스 긴두구조 타나 아니 사제구조 태그레스 어떤 고람 타나 최구조 태그레스 최구조 타나 긴두구조 태그레스 긴두구조 타나 사제구조 태그레스 디 자셔를 잡아도 측셔나로 뜻송도
Therefore Chandrakirti says in his Prashnapada clear words, he states that if one can appreciate the principle of emptiness, the doctrine of emptiness, if one can posit emptiness, then one can posit the interdependent world, the world of interdependent origination. If one can posit that, then one can posit the causality, the causal relationship between suffering and its origin. And once one can accept the causal relationship between the suffering and its origin, then one can also conceive and accept the possibility of its cessation. If one can do that, then one can also accept the possibility of individuals, Sangha members who have realized and actualized these states. If one can do that, then of course one can also conceive Buddhas who have perfected these states of cessation.
자상가 나와 땡중 때문에 구조되면서 아니 때는 좀니 준세도 쳐야지 아니 러시 동거셔야 돼 전달돼 봤지 담반이 뜻이 나가서 주셔 대단해 아니 담바시 남샤지 담바시 남샤가 타네 아니 가서 촉숨 군조숨도
So this is how one can appreciate the Buddhist, fundamental Buddhist doctrines of the true truths. It is from the understanding of our phenomenal world of experience and everyday world of lived world of experience that one can appreciate what is known as the world of Samvriti Satya, the world of conventional reality, where causal principle operates. Once you can accept that, then you can also accept the fundamental underlying reality, the empty nature of that world, which according to Buddhism is the ultimate truth, the Paramartha Satya. And here we can see a kind of a relationship between the two aspects of reality, because the world of appearance is used not so much as a contrast or an oppositional world to the world of ultimate truth, but rather it is used as the very evidence or the very basis, grounds on which the ultimate nature of reality is accepted. Once you can understand the relationship and the nature of these two truths, the world of conventional reality and the ultimate truth, then one is in a good position to fully understand the meaning of the Four Noble Truths taught in the Scriptures. Once you can understand the Four Noble Truths, then you have laid a profound foundation to develop a good understanding of what is meant by taking refuge in the three jewels. So when I speak about two truths, you must keep in mind that I'm speaking from the perspectives of the Madhyamaka school, the middle way school of Buddhism. Of course, the very term two truths is used is not something that is confined to this school alone. You can find the concept of two truths in other Buddhist schools of thought, such as Vaibhashika, Swatrantika, and Chittamatra as well. And also we can find this concept of two truths in non-Buddhist philosophical schools as well. Now the question is, why Four Noble Truths? Why do they exist? And why did the Buddha teach the Four Noble Truths? And now here we must relate that to our own experience as an individual human being. It is a fact, it's a natural fact of existence that we all as individuals possess this innate desire to seek happiness and to seek to overcome suffering. And that is a fact of our natural sort of existence. And this is something that is very instinctual and innate, and it does not need any validation or justifications for its existence. Just as it is a natural, sort of instinctual kind of desire, so do each of us have the right to fulfill that aspiration. Of course, suffering is something everybody wishes to avoid, and we also have the right to try to overcome that suffering. Happiness is something that we all aspire to achieve, and of course we have a right to fulfill that aspiration to attain happiness. So if this sort of aspiring to achieve happiness and wishing to overcome suffering is our natural state of being, that is our natural kind of quest, then the question arises, how do we go about fulfilling that valid natural aspiration? So here we find in the teachings of the Four Noble Truths an understanding of two sets of cause and results, cause and effects. On the one hand, you have suffering, which is what we all try to avoid. And suffering comes into being from nowhere, but as a result of causes its own causes and conditions. And similarly, you have happiness on the other side. And cessation can be seen as the highest form of happiness. Now here, when we talk about happiness, we should not confine our understanding purely only to the level of feeling states. Certainly, cessation is not a state of feeling, but it's one could say that the cessation is the highest culmination or highest form of happiness, because it is a true state of freedom from suffering. So, and that true freedom from suffering or happiness, true happiness, again does not come into being from nowhere or without any cause. Of course, here, from the Buddha's understanding, cessation, because it is not in conditioned existence, cannot be said that it was produced by something. But of course, actualization or attainment of that cessation depends on the path. It depends on an individual's effort. It does not come. You cannot attain cessation without making an effort. So one could say that the path that leads to the cessation is the cause that leads to the cessation. So within the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, what we find are two sets of cause and effects, which are all aimed at enabling the individual to fulfill this fundamental aspiration to be happy and to overcome suffering.
나 담바시 구름디 아니 균제 중릉기 구름디 매버체 이 냠랭기 아니 나 냠노께당기 난갈 때는 구름디 송인체 동네 군중 고과 람스 담바시.
And then the question could be asked, if, of course, if that's the reason why Four Noble Truths are taught, then one could ask about why there is this specific sequence, why the Four Noble Truths are taught in a particular order, why suffering first and its origin afterwards. So here we should understand that these order has nothing to do with where things come into being in reality, but rather it has more to do with how an individual can go about in practicing the Buddhist path and attaining realizations based on that practice, and that has to do with the order of the Four Noble Truths.
잠바고도 안다 유라면 나로리야 내는 시자 내지균이 방자라 대내 도저 맨날 담바 자와 따르스 아니 동의주도 된거보다 대신람 아니 시자 방자 리보셔시 잡어셔시 담바셔시 송니 다 빼나 아주 내기 나에 동의를 뺏고네 아니 도마 내 너기 요디 그냥 시고레스 봐 내 너기 요디 시베이나 다 신의 내들 민주별로 게임이잖아요 아니 내디 죽하는 데는 중도와 뒤줄이야 제 전도인 거예요.
Maitreya states in his Uttara Tantra, a Sublime Continuum, which is a text, he states that he states that one must recognize that one is suffering. So the illness has to be first recognized, and then the causes of illness to be avoided, and the state of sort of cure must be sought, and then the medicine that would lead to that cure is something that one must take or adopt. Similarly, suffering is something that one must recognize, and the origin of the suffering is something that one must abandon. And the cessation of suffering and its origin is something that one must aspire to actualize, and then the paths that would lead to to that cessation must be realized. So what this points to is that here the analogy that is used to explain the way in which realizations based on the Four Noble Truths could be attained, the analogy used here is the example of a sick person. In order for that sick person to get well, the first step is that the sick person must know that he or she is sick, or he or she is ill. But without that, the desire to become well or cured from that sickness would not arise. And once you have that recognition, awareness that you are sick, then of course you will try to find out what led to it, what were the conditions that led to it, and what makes you even more sick. Once you have recognized that, then you will also gain sort of an understanding whether it could be cured or not, and then you will have sort of a wish to be free from that illness. Once you have that wish, then you will apply all the medication. It's not just a mere wish, but also once you have recognized what are the conditions that led to your illness, you will also have a stronger desire to be free from that, because you, in a sense, you will also have a conviction that you can overcome that illness. Once you have that conviction, then you will also apply all the medications and get treatment and so on. Similarly, unless you know that you are suffering, your desire to be free from suffering would not arise in the first place. So the first step for a practicing Buddhist is to recognize your state of being as a dukkha, as in the nature of suffering. Once you have attained that recognition, then you will, of course, look into the causes and conditions that give rise to that state of suffering.
다전에 자든데 인도 동네에 타르에 따단도 대화지 되게 가서라 따단도 대화 대당 대두지 따 탑람지 예바 인자네 아니 수족이 민두비 동네 사미아디 따 중전대 말이에요.
It's very important to understand the context of the Buddhist emphasis on developing this profound recognition of being in the state of suffering or dukkha. Otherwise, there is a danger of misunderstanding the Buddhist spiritual kind of approach, outlook, and thinking that Buddhism demands a lot of morbid thinking. Being sort of pessimistic and thinking only about suffering. The reason why Buddha emphasized so much on developing a profound insight into the nature of suffering is because there is an alternative, there is a way out, there is a possibility of a freedom from that suffering. That's why the recognition or realization of the nature of suffering becomes very important, because the stronger or more deep your insight into the state of suffering is, the stronger the force of your aspiration to gain freedom from that would become. So it is important to understand that this emphasis on the nature of suffering and the Buddhist spiritual path is within the context of a wider perspective, where there is an appreciation that there is a way out, that there is a possibility of a freedom from that suffering. Otherwise, if there is no possibility of a freedom from suffering, if there is no concept of a liberation from suffering, then it is totally pointless to spend so much time reflecting on suffering. It will be just useless.
다 군의 유무적인 군대다 남자적인 군대 이부터 바 군중다 아니 람댕기 딘 대부 연단한테만 컨디션 만드셔 14로 전에 아니 야라준이 되게 도매 머리걸 되는 두지는 남신의 민수 가사리 계제자고 저하신 도스마다 아니 야라준이 송도 야라준이 룩중도 타네 아니 가서 그게 코 죽도체 코 룽중도 하네 머리번에 맞아 것이부터 마송야다 야나 야 다갈래 양고 룽중도 니수니 것이 된지 아니 계획 된지 중 계획 된지 아니 시베 된지 중 도시야 전 그런 룽중도 니샤 룽중도 니도 하는 마셔니 가다 군인 유무초 코 죽수치.
So one could say that these two sets of cause and effects that I was talking about earlier refers to the process of an unenlightened existence on the one hand, which relates to the causal nexus between suffering and its origin, and then a process of an enlightened existence which pertains to the causal nexus of a path and the true cessation. Now, when the Buddha elaborates the understanding of these two processes, then he taught what is called the teaching, the doctrine of the 12 links of dependent origination, these being the 12 members of the link being ignorance leading to volition, and then that leading to consciousness and so on. So that is in some sense an elaboration on the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, when the causal process of an unenlightened existence that is sort of within the framework of suffering and its origin is elaborated, then you have the sequential order of the 12 links of dependent origination, how an individual sentient being, as a result of certain causes and conditions, enters into this process of samsaric existence or unenlightened existence. Whereas that very individual, as a result of certain practices, can engage in a reversal process of that order, which pertains to the processes that leads to enlightenment. And here, then the 12 cycles, instead of rotating in a sort of a sequential way, their sequences are reversed, and that leads to the true cessation. For example, like if you seize the continuum of ignorance, then of course the continuum of the volitional actions will be seized. If that is seized, then the consciousness that serves as the kind of duje. And so that ceases. When the consciousness ceases, the name and form ceases. So you can see that the teachings on the 12 links of dependent origination are in some sense elaboration of the two sets of causes and conditions.
Yeah, that's enough.
So we will have some questions here at this point.
Written questions.
So perhaps in the next sessions, if the questions could be in a written form, it would be more convenient. The question was that His Holiness spoke about individuals gaining the practice, sort of individual practitioners gaining insight into the Four Noble Truths, and then spoke about Buddha having perfected these insights. So the question was, what is the difference between individuals gaining insights and Buddha's perfection of these insights? Is that the question?
Then, Midawa, Dogwa Lord Chashana. Toma Bana, Dengzin She. Dengzin de, any that Tenju, she today, Rigwepa Jenny, Papa Jane, any touching zingi, Logdodi, any Tazung Morchi.
To give an example of, say, gaining insight into the subtle impermanence that the momentary nature of all things and events. For an individual who, at the initial point, may have an understanding of things as being permanent, at the initial stage, that sort of grasping at permanence of things could be quite strong and intense. Now, in order to lessen that grip, loosen that grip, you need some form of critical reasoning, which could, even if it can cast a doubt or suspicion in the person's mind as to things being permanent, that has in itself made an impact on the person's mind, because it has at least had the effect of loosening the grip of things being permanent or eternal. Now, that is again not enough. You need further reinforcement of critical reasoning to point you towards a kind of tending more towards the impermanence of things. Even that is not enough. You need a further conviction, and that can be gained through, again, constant reflection, and that can lead to what is known as the inferential understanding or intellectual understanding of impermanence. And that, again, is not enough in order to have a strong impact on your on your behavior, you have to gain direct insight or intuitive experience of the impermanence of things. And that, again, needs to be further perfected, because the idea is that the grasping at permanence is deeply embedded in your consciousness, that it's not just one insight can dispel it. It's a long process of deepening your insight that would eventually dispel that even as smallest tendency towards grasping at permanence. So this is it's a long process of kind of deepening your insight. So this would be the same in the case of emptiness or any other things. However, on the other side, there are certain aspects of the path which may have less to do with cognitive experiences, which may have more to do with, I suppose one could say, enhancement of the heart, like compassion, bodhicitta, and so on. In these areas, at the initial stage, of course, one has to develop some understanding of what compassion is, and then you have to have some sort of notion of how that could be enhanced. And then as a result of your practice, you may gain at the initial stage some kind of simulated experience of these. When you sit down and think, you may feel compassionate, but that compassionate may not be long-lasting, that may not be pervasive, that may not permeate your very being. So what is needed is a further deepening of that experience, so that your compassion becomes spontaneous. It is not dependent upon a sort of intellectual simulation. Rather, it would be a truly spontaneous, responsive to sort of occasions that would demand that response. And through that, again, that experience of compassion could be further deepened, and it becomes universal. There is, again, a different aspect of the path. So it's again here, it's a long process.
Any 다 탑시야 탑시 똑바지자로 다 무튼다 야르게르알이야 아니 베나데 베나 메다보 무슨 통행의 로직 베나 다미 무슨 통행의 로직 무튼이 야르게르알 탑기 야 로시고야 탑기 도리도 제대야 땜부 차야다야 디베 느베 탐미를 패야야 싫어부 좋아제 탑신이 베 송지체니 독스도고.
So these two aspects of the path are known as, in the technical Buddhist language, the method aspect of the path and the insight or the wisdom aspect of the path. And these two must go hand in hand. These two must be combined, because in order for the insights to be enhanced and deepened, you need the complementing factors from this method aspect, such as compassion and bodhicitta and so on. Similarly, in order to enhance and deepen your realization of compassion and bodhicitta, you need, and also in order to strengthen them, you need the factor of wisdom, the insight, which would sort of, ground them, which would sort of enhance them. So you need, therefore, a sort of an approach where there is a combination or the union of method and wisdom.
다야 델레이 캠에로 가수래 베나 미다보토고 로티기 그 겐다르 등징으로 들어왔다. 베나 미다보토에 베나 미다보 무슨 통인도잖아요. 다 디가다 등징으로 로티 매바 차버리디 이네 아다 등징으로 로티 저기 야고 가수래 미다보토고 로티 베 가수래 베 고바 탐미로 패야리야 더동 등징으로 들어가 느끼기 들어다.
So similarly, in the case of, say, insight into impermanence, although that very insight would enable the individual to overcome graspings at permanence, but that does not mean to say that that path alone would lead to total liberation, because there are many other fetters of mind that constricts the mind, such as grasping at...
liberation
no.
미다보 통에 로 코라 그냥 가서 다시 고바 탐미를 해야라.
That insight into impermanence and deepening that alone is not enough, even to perfect that insight. You need further complementary factors, because there are other other factors within your mind. It's not just permanence, grasping at permanence, but also grasping at independent objective reality of things, grasping at abiding principles, or grasping at intrinsic reality. So these need to be counteracted through, again, developing insight into emptiness. So what you see here is a very complex process of progression of an individual's level of consciousness through spiritual processes towards perfection. Your Holiness, is there a difference between thought and action relating to cause and effect? That is to say, can a thought cause an action and vice versa?
Peji, 마상의 레시전에 sembelega samtang로, sembele samtam이나 sam랑 군우랑 가는 거, 군우 소리다.
Of course, when we talk about the Buddhist concept of karma or karmic action, it is not confined to the bodily action alone. It also embraces the mental acts or emotional acts, if one could say. For example, when we talk about acts of covetousness or harmful intention, and these need not necessarily manifest in behavior. One can have the full action of these thoughts without being expressed in action at all. So one can see a completion of these acts even at the level of mind or thought. Your Holiness, it is a well-known fact that you are a very busy person with many demands on your time. Could you advise a lay person with home, family, and work demands how to develop a systematic schedule or pattern of practice? Systematic pattern the routine. Generally speaking, we must know that when we talk about practicing the Dharma or doing, meditating on the Dharma, we must know that it is something that needs to be done 24 hours of the day. So that's why in the traditional Buddhist explanation we make a distinction between actual meditation sessions and post-meditational periods. The idea being that both while you are in the meditative session and also when you are out of it, you should be fully within the realm of practice. So, in fact, the post-meditational periods are a real test for strength of your practice, because one could say that during the meditation, in some sense, you are equipping yourself so that when you come out of your meditation session, you are better equipped to deal with the demands of the everyday reality of your existence. This is analogous to recharging your battery. The very purpose of recharging your battery is that so that you could use it to run something. So similarly, once you have equipped yourself in your meditation through whatever practices that you engage in, as a human being, you can't avoid the daily routines of your existence, be it interacting with others or all the everyday realities of your existence. These are something that as human beings you cannot avoid. And it is during these periods that you should be able to live according to the principles of your Dharma practice, and that is the real test.
So, the reason that Kora Kasore, as let go to the Daz Assembly, subject Jayagi, some does matter how shall he. The next Samstan does the comedy and any sort of Nisha Tuchi for a ship for those man. The young Kormi church to Rotiachi, a younger one. And Bezus came much about that should be to gas in the culture in Bezus, much about the young tail.
So, of course, at the initial stage, as a beginner, you do need sort of periods of concentrated meditational practice so that you have a kind of at least a base from which you can begin. So this is very crucial. And then once you have established that kind of base, then of course you will be able to then adopt a way of life where your daily activities, everyday activities of your life could be at least be made to accord with the principles of the Dharma. So what it does point to is the importance of making an effort. So without effort, there is no way that we can integrate the principles of Dharma in one's life.
To a serious practitioner, the most serious effort is very necessary. Without that, just a short prayer and some chanting and some recitation with mala, that's not sufficient. I can't change your mind. Our negative emotion is, I think, so powerful. So in order to challenge that, we need, I think, the constant effort. Through that way, yes, definitely we can change. But usually I responded to my Western friends, their question or their request, the quickest and easiest and most effective. Then perhaps another question, cheapest. So that's, I think, impossible. That's impossible. I think that is, I usually feel that is a sign of failure. Sign of failure.
Your Holiness, what is the difference between self-realization and God-realization? Self-realization and God-realization.
I don't know.
Would Your Holiness say that you are free from suffering?
No. Oh, certainly not. Lot of suffering. And currently some suffering here. Voice, coughing. That also a kind of suffering.
Can you talk a little on the nature and structure of pure consciousness? What are the properties of pure consciousness? What actually is consciousness? These topics will be covered in later sessions.
Thank you. See you again.